Hello, good morning, everyone. If you're here in the Glenville general area or somewhere in the Capital District, it's beautiful out today, a little cooler, still sunny. We like that. But we're thankful for every day, aren't we? And I'm always thankful to have the chance to be here and that you're here with me. So thanks. So today we're going to talk a little bit about some of my favorite saints. When the announcement about it was posted, there's a little picture with it, and I, of course, in my haste this morning, forgot to bring it with me, but it says that I don't know if I believe in the saints, but I like to pray to them every night. It feels like a slumber party, something to that effect. And I, of course, do believe in the saints. And I just like that whimsical nature of that picture and message because I do think of the saints kind of as our friends, right? Our friends in Christ. So that was something I sort of prompted me. I have that hanging up. I've had it for, 30 years or something. So it's from a series called Story People. But I love the saints. And even when I was away from church, I never let go of the saints, which is probably why I didn't stay away forever. So I wanted to talk a little bit about them, because that obviously is something that is, more unique to Catholic Christians, Episcopalians, Orthodox Church, all celebrate the saints in a particular way. So do other traditions, but we, of course, in the Roman Catholic tradition, have a strong tradition of the saints. Leon Bloy once said, "Life only holds one tragedy ultimately, not to have been a saint." And I also like what St. Jean Vianney said. We just celebrated him the other day, the Curé d'Ars. The saints did not all begin well, but they ended well. To which I remind you, just like we can. So we're all saints in the making, aren't we? So as I said, I always loved the saints. I never forgot them. And so I wanted to talk about some of my favorite ones today and get you thinking about your favorite ones. And maybe we can all always learn about other saints or saints in the making. As you know, the process, or probably know, the process of becoming a saint takes a long time for most. And that's fine. I think that's all in God's time, not our own. There's, of course, the famous book, Butler's Saints, and that's always a good volume to have on hand. I have this other book called All Saints, Daily Reflections for Saints, Prophets, and Witnesses for Our Time by Robert Ellsberg. He's the publisher at Orbis Books. And this is a lovely book. He does these little biographies of saints, as I like to say, canonized and otherwise, meaning not all of them are canonized and not all of them are even Catholic, but these are holy men and women that we can take inspiration and example from. So I highly recommend this book. And if you read Give Us This Day, his reflections on saints should be familiar to him because he writes them all. So one of my very favorite stories is when I was a little kid. I lived in the New York City area, and my mother used to always tell me, but we never did go, that if we wanted to, we could go see Mother Cabrini, Saint Frances Cabrini, the great Italian-American immigrant who came here and made a revolution through the care that she and her congregation gave and still give to God's people. Mother Cabrini lived and worked in the New York City area, and when she died, as she went through her sainthood process, she was found to be incorruptible. And so therefore, her body remains whole. So you can go to New York City in the way northern tip of Manhattan and visit her mother church and see her, where she is in a glass coffin, and she is at rest there. So I finally got to go as an adult, and I've been there many times. But when I was little, my mother would tell me about this, and I was just obsessed that this could be true. And I can tell you, it's true. I've also had the chance to see St. Louise de Marillac and St. Catherine Labouré, St. Catherine Labouré being the saint who brought us the miraculous medal. They both lived in a convent on the Rue de Bac in Paris, and they are both there near the altar. So there's all kinds of saints you can see in that way. I don't think that makes that you have to see one to believe it, but it's always kind of, I think, an interesting pilgrimage, because the saints remind us what Christ tells us is that, God became human and flesh, and we too are flesh, and God became like us so that we could go and be redeemed by that very God. So those are just like an early saint memory for me. Grew up in an Italian-American parish, so a lot of heavy St. Anthony was another saint of my childhood, some different ones. One of my favorite saints is Brother Lawrence. He's actually not a saint yet. Brother Lawrence was kind of a lowly kitchen helper in a monastery. He was known for his prayer of the practice of presence in the speak, Fran. Presence, being in the presence of God, like our constant reminders of that, and the practice of the presence of God. Brother Lawrence made his work in the kitchen all acts of holiness. He has a prayer to the Lord of pots and pans and things. Since I have no great time to be a saint, by doing lovely things or watching late with thee, he goes on to say after a few lines, make me a saint by getting meals and washing up the plates. So it's an invitation to us to think about the holiness in the ordinary acts of our lives. And sometimes we're doing those tasks, some more mundane tasks, that, why do I have to do this? I'm just sick of this. And we can remember that God is infused in every act and every moment of our life, and if we remind ourselves of that. So I like that one. And he's a good reminder for that. I think also of Saint Benedict of Nursia, of course, the great monastic saint, the father of all, contemporary, meaning from the 6th century forward, so not exactly modern day contemporary. Monastic practice springs forth from the rule of Saint Benedict that he wrote when he began his monastery, first at Nursia, and then in Monte Cassino was the big Benedictine abbey in Italy. Saint Benedict, of course, is famous for how action and contemplation work together. The motto is ora et labora, pray and work. And there's a time for prayer and a time for work, and it's how to bring those things into balance. I think he's good for us to remember because, and good for me to remember, is because he brings us to that place of prayer, that our work cannot exist without our prayer, that our action cannot exist without our contemplation. So we think of how we kind of have to keep busy all the time. at least many of us do. And I think we're given a lot of reminders in our culture, in our society, that work is the path to glory. I'm not saying it is not, but work without stillness is out of balance. And that was really a very Benedictine thing. So important to remember that there are times when we have to literally do nothing and literally appear to be lazy, but we're not lazy if that quiet time is spent in engagement with God. So that's a good reminder from St. Benedict. Another favorite saint of mine is St. Dymphna. You probably can hardly see her, but I don't know where I got this or when, but I keep her on my desk. I love St. Dymphna so much. St. Dymphna, if you're not familiar with her, was born in Ireland she was the daughter of a Christian mother, I guess, and secretly baptized, but her father was a pagan, and he was the king. So her mother died when when Dymphna was in her teens, and her father was bereft, and he wanted nothing more than to find another wife, a replacement for Dymphna's mother. And he never found anyone. So he returned home to his teenage daughter. This is not a happy story. And his idea was that because she was beautiful like her mother, he would marry her. Now we can see why this is a bad idea. Dymphna, being a Christian and being of sound mind, she fled. She had some helpers, and she had a priest, I guess, who was her confessor, and some friends, and they escaped, and they took a boat, and they went to Belgium. And they were there, but they were found because the king had a lot of power, and he had finances. So she was refusing to go back, and she was martyred. She was beheaded because she refused to go back, and that was in about the year 620. At some period not long after that, the legend goes that some people suffering from severe mental illness, we don't really know what that means. It could have been epilepsy or some other seizure-driven illness or anything else, were in the countryside where she was martyred, and they were healed. And a church was built in that very place and remains there. And it is also accompanied by a home for the mentally ill, a large institution that can be occupied by many, many, many patients. And she is the patron of epilepsy, insanity, and neurological diseases. I had a lot of mental health problems when I was growing up, but I didn't know that I did, and this persisted into my young adulthood. That's when I met Dymphna, and she really helped me through that time. I really attribute so much of my healing to her intercession. And that's a reminder, sometimes people who are not Catholic say, you create idols out of saints or out of Mary. And while we pray to the saints or to Mary, I think just remember that as we include them in our prayers, we're praying through them and asking them for their intercession and support. So they are not God, and we know that. So Dymphna, when she turned up at some point, I like to keep her around, even though I think I feel pretty well these days, thanks be to God. But she's a beautiful example of a saint. Also, I think a saint important for people who have suffered, especially childhood sexual violence or any kind of parental abuse. She's a great patroness for that. Another saint that I love is Hildegard of Bingen. Saint Hildegard was finally canonized. I mean, this is someone who was alive like in the 11th century, 12th century. And she was not actually made a saint until 2012 by Pope Benedict the 16th. But she was also called at that moment a doctor of the church. You know, we have people who are so elevated, saints so elevated, they are known as doctors of the church. And she was named to be one of them. She was a child, and her parents brought her to a monastery in Germany, and she basically grew up there. That was not uncommon at that time. She had visions, so she was a mystic and a visionary. She understood all of her visions as living sparks, in her words, of God's love, coming as daylight comes from the sun. She saw the mystery of God in all of creation. She saw harmony and balance and unity in a very particular way. She was known in her time for her very fierce personality. Remember, this is a woman in a very long time ago. But she she challenged one of the emperors for supporting at least 3 different anti-popes. She challenged the Cathars, who they were rejected Catholic Christianity, believing they had a more pure vision of it. And that the Cathar heresy also is reminiscent of other saints who fought against that. She preached, she had a preaching voice, again, unusual for that time, unusual for this time. And her monastery was kind of shut down for a little while because she had permitted the burial, as the abbess, she permitted the burial of a young man who had been excommunicated. And she said that he had been reconciled and received sacraments, but the bishop forbade the reception of Eucharist. That was a sanction that lasted a very long time. So she is the patron of musicians and writers. I think she is someone to look to for her tremendous creativity. She was, she did so many things. She was like a medieval pharmacist coming up with healing herbs and salves and things like that. And so she was quite a remarkable woman, and some of her music, which of course you can still hear and listen to, a monastic chant, is gorgeous. Now, do any of you know Saint Josephine Bakita? She's another one that just like completely blows my mind. Of course, don't they all? Because they're all pretty remarkable. Josephine Bakita was a slave. Josephine Bakita was born in basically Darfur, which is southern Sudan, as we know, a place that's a very challenging part of the world to this day. There was the colonialization of that part of the world was primarily Italian, Sudan, Ethiopia, and so forth. And so she was, really like a little girl who became a household servant for an Italian family. And she ended up going to Italy with that family, back to Italy. And I mean, I think that we have to look through the lens of what things were at that time, but it doesn't change the import of evil around it. So she was essentially their property in the household, slave. Because she was with the family and they were Catholic, she ended up becoming Catholic and was deeply in love with God and with the church. She and her charge, their little girl, lived actually for a time in a convent with the Canossian sisters, and the family actually got into a legal battle with the nuns because she wanted to stay with them. She was older and the little girl had grown up. She wanted to stay with them. So a judge sided with her and the sisters, saying slavery was illegal and that she was free. She entered the monastery in 1893 and made her profession of faith 3 years later. She was actually not a monastery, a convent. She became a Catholic sister, although in many ways, as much as she was accepted, she still occupied a different status. She said this once: "Be good, love the Lord, pray for those who do not know him. What a great grace it is to know God." And I think as someone who grew to meet God in her childhood, her love for God became great. So imagine the life she came from and the life she led as a sister. She was, her cause started in 1959, and she was canonized in the year 2000. She is the patroness of human trafficking and of slavery or any kind of forced labor. So she's a great example, I think, for her time and for our time. There are just so many different saints that we could refer to. I'm sure you have your favorites, and maybe in the comments you can leave who some of them are. I think it's always good to have different kinds of books and do different research to see what other saints we might not know, because there are so many. I mean, I grew up knowing St. Christopher as the patron saint of travel. And of course, we know Christopher kind of got bumped. But, I still have a St. Christopher medal at home. I'm just saying. This is another nice book. I've showed it to you before. It's called A Feast for Hungry Souls by Susan Muto. And it is not just about saints, but there are many, many saints that are profiled in this book of essays. So I recommend this along with All Saints to get kind of two different flavors. The point is that saints all start out in the same way as we do, as ordinary human beings, doing ordinary things, sometimes kind of stupid things. St. Augustine, whose feast we will celebrate at the end of this month, we all know that St. Augustine was kind of a wild man. He made lots and lots and lots of bad choices, and his mother, St. Monica, prayed for him all the time that he should be converted to the faith. This was in North Africa in the 4th century. And she's praying and praying. So for all of you who feel like you have maybe a child, a friend, a spouse, someone who's not there, keep praying, have hope. Anyway, Monica's praying and praying, and finally, Augustine, who was a sinner of really epic proportions, becomes a saint. And not only a saint, another great doctor of the church. And he's just, his wisdom and brilliance set the stage for so much of who we are as Catholic Christians today. So we all have this potential in us. And to be a saint does not necessarily mean to be well known, because there are so many saints we will never hear of. They may not be canonized, but we know there are so many people doing so many good things quietly and persistently, serving God by serving one another. So I think the saints are a great, important tradition of our church. One of the many reasons I feel like I would never want to leave. Even when I left, I didn't want to leave the saints, and I certainly don't want to leave them now. So let's look to our favorite saints, make some new friends of saints, and always call upon them for their intercessory help, so that as we take our own daily journeys as people of God, the great cloud of witnesses, as St. Paul put it, will all be journeying with us. So with that, I say thank you again, and I'll see you next week.